is foreign policy analyst Hagar Chemali, good friend of the show. She's also the host of the YouTube show Oh My World and a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. Hagar, welcome back. Good morning.
Good morning, Hena.
We saw President Trump posted Hamas has until Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, to negotiate these outstanding terms of the peace plan. Again, it's a 20-point plan. What happens, Hagar, if a deal isn't reached by tomorrow, 6 p.m.?
Well, if it doesn't reach, it could start to fall by the wayside. But what I would expect to see also is the U.S. increase pressure on Qatar specifically. Let's not forget that earlier this week, Qatar got a major win. They made out big from the United States with a security agreement they got from the United States that essentially amounts to the equivalent of something you would see in Article 5 of NATO, meaning an attack on Qatar means the United States would come to its defense. That is a huge deal. Not one that all taxpayers in the United States are going to love, by the way. That said, if we're going to give that to Qatar, what does the United States get in return? Qatar has to deliver Hamas. They must in this deal. So if they don't, within this time frame, the U.S. is going to increase pressure on Qatar and say, listen, we gave you a big win there. You're going to have to deliver us Hamas on this. There are agreements so far in negotiating the details of this peace agreement. While that is normal, as you said earlier, they left a lot of vague language saying, as to the rest of the deal, they were talking mainly about disarmament. That is up to the Palestinian people and to a process in accordance with international law, blah, blah, blah. That's literally what that is, blah, blah, blah. It is meant to delay. It's meant to increase this vague territory where they could either delay things or make it murky, but it's up to Qatar really to put pressure on Hamas, as it is on the U.S. to put pressure on Israel.
Hagar, you saw this play out earlier this week, so did I. The deal was initially presented by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. We saw those pictures come out of the Oval Office. Do you think Netanyahu is willing to make concessions with Hamas?
Well, he has to know that there are always going to be some concessions that have to be made. I will say that there was reporting quoting him where he said in Hebrew after he had met with Trump that he said, don't worry, this is never going to happen. Verbatim. I mean, that's not my quote. That's not my translation. That's what I read in reporting, that he was telling folks, don't worry, this is not going to happen. So that's what he's saying to an Israeli public. Now, I'm not so sure about the don't worry part, but he probably was saying also in part that there are a lot of demands here for Hamas to accept that they've been previously unwilling to accept, namely the question of disarmament. This has always been the sticking point. On the Israeli side, by the way, there is also a side for Netanyahu that has been difficult for him to accept, which is that there's an element of that 20-point peace plan that talks about the eventual path to Palestinian statehood. Again, very vague, but that said, that's something that the Netanyahu government and Netanyahu himself have not always necessarily been on board with, or not, at least not explicitly. Perhaps explicitly not on board with two states. So that said, there are these murky parts. Now, again, it is normal when you make a deal for all the small details to be worked out. Things like exactly when are the hostages being released? Trump said all at once, but does all at once mean half tomorrow, the living tomorrow, and those who are dead the next day, for example? If so, how and where and who's involved? Right? That's normal, but that said, there are a lot of concessions on both sides, and I hope both understand that the end to any war includes concessions. I think both understand that. They're just both quite stubborn.
Hagar, my next question: can the world trust Hamas?
No, the world can never trust Hamas, ever. The world can never trust any terrorist group or any non-state actor, which is what you have in Hamas. But that said, they have dictated the rules of the war and the rules of the field. And unfortunately, that's what has made this war so difficult, so trying, so difficult for the Israeli government to execute in a way for it to achieve its goals. It's what has made it so precarious for civilians, of course. And so that said, when you're talking about whether we can trust them in this process, no, you cannot. That's what Qatar will be there for, to put that pressure, to put their boots on their neck, to make sure that Hamas delivers. So that doesn't mean that you can't make a deal and try to move that needle forward. My expectation, if what you're thinking of is, I have hope, not optimism. I have hope that they could get somewhere where you get to the release of hostages.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.